Namaste, Namaskar, Vanakkam, good morning to everybody. I'm grateful to the Chinmaya Mission, the Swamijis and Sri Gurumurti Ji, who is not yet here, for having given me this opportunity to interact with all of you as part of the C20. The year of Indian presidency of the G20 gives us tremendous opportunities to connect with one another across the globe and inside the country as well. And more importantly, it is not just about economics, foreign policy, or security, but it's also about culture, education, digital technologies, labor, agriculture. In all respects, we all have a lot to learn from each other and share with each other. And that is what forums such as this provides the opportunity. And it is entirely befitting that the Government of India entrusted this wonderful responsibility to the Chinmaya Mission to organize the working group on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in the C20 track. Because this concept, as we all know, even though it has been handed down to us from thousands of years ago, is more relevant than ever after nearly 80 years of largely peaceful post-World War II evolution. Recently, the leader of the Papua New Guinea proclaimed, Pacific Islands will rally behind India at global fora. With that statement, he was making an important unsaid point. In the light of the giants, in the fight of the giants, we trust India. The question that naturally emanates is, why India? Where does this trust come from? The answer is simple. From the consistent actions backed by philosophical underpinnings of this ancient and modern civilization. Eons ago, the Mahapanishad professed that the world is like one large family. Keeping aside the spiritual connotations of non-duality, this phrase, in its literal sense, translates to celebrating humanity beyond borders. Today, as India heralds the G20 summit, negotiating key economic issues, and facilitating a convergence of viewpoints from all parts of the globe, our ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam stands true to its essence. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam encapsulates the paradigm of viewing the whole world and its ecosystem as an extension of oneself. This is in stark contrast to the anthropocentric philosophies preached elsewhere, where man was viewed as the pinnacle of natural creation. Our scriptures often show wisdom flowing from all living beings, birds, animals, and trees. We celebrate the ecosystem that we inhabit through festivals and rituals that bow down to the humanity in all living creatures. Businesses and economies thrive when they open themselves to the exchange of ideas, trade, and culture. Once the world stepped out of the confines of colonization and the two world wars, the latter half of the 20th century acted as a restorative and regenerative period for multilateralism. It is during this time that per capita incomes worldwide grew multifold, thanks to a rise in innovation and technology. Thus, an environment of trust has always been essential for enhancing the welfare of humankind. However, the recent decade has shown a sharp increase in protectionism, a dampening of world trade, and increasing polarization. In the light of this, it becomes essential to look towards the ancient yet highly relevant concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. As we go forward, economic polarization is unfortunately a realistic prospect. The recent growth of protectionism, as I mentioned, geopolitical tensions and technological rivalries that have followed events such as US-China trade war, the Brexit from the UK, tensions in Europe, and the COVID pandemic are concerning. Successive shocks such as these have prompted economies to undertake structural changes, but also draw inward, driven by an anxiousness to protect their established ways of life and living. The recent imposition of sanctions in response to the tensions in Ukraine has further divided the world. Alarmed by this, central banks have been racing to diversify their currency holdings away from the dollar. Given that sanctions have become the foreign policy tool of choice to deal with international actors deemed to be hostile, developing nations are now worried about being next in line for various reasons and pretexts. What goes unnoticed is that sanctions make living conditions worse for the ordinary people in the target countries. The dramatic magnitude of their effects is similar to losses suffered during armed conflicts. Is it any wonder, therefore, that nations are now aiming to decouple themselves from the use of the US dollar? Artificial intelligence has spawned a new breed of controversy. While the technology indeed has potential, the prospect of misuse brings collective fears. AI can be potentially manipulative, can polarize political ideology. Already, ChatGPT is accused of being left-wing centric. It also has an inbuilt bias towards the dominant point of view in the world. This can be detrimental to the voice of minorities and other excluded communities and voices being heard. In fact, the overreach of AI threatens accountability. It can be a great tool, so long as humans with a conscience remain its master. The reality of the current world, however, is, of course, not so, and it is also a state of soaring inequality. The World Inequality Report 2022 shows that we have regressed to the early 20th century levels of inequality, with 50% of the world's population having access to only 2% of the output. Then next, climate change is a pressing issue requiring collective action from all nations, irrespective of their income levels or the state of development. But the present approaches to climate action are not based on the principle of equity or fairness, since little attention is being given to the economic consequences of the proposed climate policies. So I have highlighted several complex issues, and these require global collective action, tailored to the needs of each nation or groups of nations. A world economy based on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam would meet the needs of all people within the means of this living planet, so that we and the rest of the nature can thrive together. Our recognition of the limitation of one-size-fits-all approach is the starting point for Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. However, formulating economic policies or conducting business in the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is not easy, because for human beings in general, cooperation is not the default mode, but competition and rivalry are. The urge to exert dominance, display accomplishment, comes natural to human beings. Cooperation is often opportune and pursued only when the situation at hand cannot be performed alone. In game theory, the solution to prisoner's dilemma is never cooperation, even when the payoffs are higher. History is replete with examples where competition trumped cooperation. The most recent one is an example of vaccine nationalism. And now we are talking of nationalist sentiments in semiconductors, in chips, in rare earths and critical minerals, where nations are trying to secure these resources only for themselves, forgetting the collective humanity's needs. While developed nations competitively secured their own resources during the early pandemic stages, many poor nations were left with very little. Given this backdrop, and given this urge to compete, to look inward and to look out for oneself when the need is to look out for collective responsibility and needs, what can we do to restore the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam? Cooperation happens, as I said, when there are compelling incentives and strong leadership to ensure the achievement of desired outcomes. Previously, a strong incentive for multilateralism was trade. But with the threat of deglobalization looming over us, a new set of incentives beyond just trade are required so that multilateralism and the spirit of togetherness can propel us forward. When the profit motive, which drove globalization from the 80s until recently, is replaced by other considerations such as national security, the relationship between nations need to be redefined. And for such a redefinition, we need trust between nations. Trust, in turn, requires constant communication. In this context, forums like G20 enable nations to come together and have conversations inside as well as outside the convention halls. India's plans for taking the G20 presidency to more than 50 cities across the country is an example of this idea of fostering and facilitating communication inside and outside the conferences. Through this, there would be an exchange of soft information, allowing us to get to know the world better as much as the world gets to know India better. As conversations become more polarized, paradoxically, that is when we should push for spaces where active dialogues can be conducted. A concrete example of seeing the world as an extended version of oneself is enshrined in the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities when it comes to dealing with climate change. A simple family exemplifies this concept very well. The family's working members support the younger ones in their growth and upbringing. While each member has the common goal of welfare of the family, their responsibilities to the household vary. A child needs to study, adults are the breadwinners, and so on. In a similar sense, development goals and emissions trajectory of the global south and developing countries are very different from that of developed nations. The global south accounts for far less emissions than the rest of the developed world. India, for example, has only contributed 4% of the cumulative global emissions from 1850 until 2019 and has maintained its per capita emission at far less than the world average. I'm referring to the emission of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. As the global south catches up on its development agenda, there is a need for resources, technology, know-how transfer from the developed world on climate mitigation and adaptation policies. That is why the responsibility of the global north and the global south, at one level, it is common. The goal is common to have a world that is better and safer and cleaner for all of us to live in, but the responsibilities are differentiated. The world, of course, unfortunately for us, alternatingly moves in different directions. From the despair of World War II to recovery, to prosperity, to boredom, and later on this boredom resulting in polarization, the world increasingly resembles the decade of the 1930s, setting itself up for a protracted conflict. It is in this situation that nations need a global language to communicate and understand each other's priorities and insecurities. And that is where India's principles come to the rescue. India indeed offers a way out. The pandemic underscored to us the superpower we always possessed, that we were creatively resilient. For 3 years, 3/4 of the population relegated to their homes got free food in a recessionary and slow growth economy. The International Monetary Fund noted that the safety net provided by India through free food cushioned economic shock and acted as an insurance for the poor. In the middle of the global depression, India came out with a 1.5 lakh crore Atmanirbhar Bharat production-linked incentive scheme, an economic package aimed to do the unthinkable, a revision of the scale of domestic manufacturing policy in the middle of uncertainty. On the outside, this economic principle might appear that India was drawing inward, but in reality, it was plugging itself into the world by integrating India into the global value chain. And it is clothed in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam philosophy because India invited companies from all parts of the world to come and benefit from and participate in the PLI schemes. It stresses domestic competitiveness while integrating with the global supply chains. It is produced competitively in India, but for the world. We also ushered in a homegrown, vastly expansive, state-funded, largest vaccine program. We took it international, helping the weaker and smaller nations with vaccine diplomacy. A significant portion of it was gifted, in fact, automatically assuming the role of a leader in this part of the world. Today, having recovered from the ravages of the pandemic, global agencies project India to be the world's fastest growing economy, and we are innovating also all the time. India's digital public infrastructure development and the growth of UPI are a classic example of India's innovative culture. The mass technology adoption was initiated by the public sector, and public sector then played a catalyzing role for bringing in the private sector to participate in it. So it was a case of regulation come innovation going hand in hand. With the United Payments Interface, UPI, and the bouquet of digital public infrastructure like e-way bills, e-rupee, and threads for MSMEs, the government is chugging the digital engine along. The Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar, and Mobile Trinity helped actual beneficiaries get their intended and deserved benefits. All this has smoothened life in the country. Development at a scale not known by many of our global peers. Even today, we are all amazed by the ease of payments and the convenience of doorstep services through multiple providers at par or even exceeding that of the developed nations in the world. In fact, a testimony to our achievements is that we constantly raise the bar on aspirations. So whenever our people feel that we still have a long room to catch up, we must understand that we are constantly raising the bar on ourselves and the government and the private sector. So when reality catches up to our aspirations rise several notches also. That is something to keep in mind when we constantly complain about what is not done. India's development has taken place, therefore, without losing the essence of our inherently sustainable culture. Our practices are ecologically friendly. We use a cloth to wipe kitchens instead of tissue papers. We use water-based cleaning systems, reusing almost every household item, and we coexist with animals, and a focus on ancient home remedies of pest control, which place prevention over killing as the means of dealing with them. This is not taught. It is imbibed, learned, and passed on to succeeding generations. The small sachets sold in the rural economy as compared to the large tumblers sold in other parts of the world are a clear sign of a low-waste economy. Our economy has started benefiting from the efficiency gains due to greater formalization, higher financial inclusion, and digital technology-based economic reforms. Such rapid advancements are being made while we remain rooted in our culture, which is both sustainable and human-centric. It is high time we count on our successes and make our voices louder in favor of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We have to ask the developed world to follow suit, to put their cart behind the horse, to accept that when they preach equity, they create inequity in climate-related discourse, in taxes, in trade barriers on food items, in access to technology, in patents over common goods, etc. The principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is consistent with cooperative federalism at home. It is a cooperation founded on the bedrock of confidence and strength. Therefore, India continuously striving for and succeeding in achieving economic prosperity, combined with commensurate and proportional roles on the global stage, will mean that India's philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam will find resonance in the rest of the world. Thank you very much.